Have you heard all this buzz about India lately?
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to miss, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got big names like Ray Dalio,
Right.
Mark Mobius, Jim Rogers,
Yeah.
and they're all saying the same thing, that India is on track to become
Oh, yeah.
the world's third largest economy in just
in the next
5 years.
5 years, that's it.
5 years. Some are even calling it like the real future.
The real future.
So we've got a ton of research here
Oh, cool.
comparing India to the other major players,
Yeah.
both economically and in terms of the stock market.
Awesome.
Ready to kind of dive in and see what all this excitement is about.
Let's do it. Always up for a good deep dive. But,
Yeah,
a booming economy doesn't always mean a booming stock market.
right.
We've seen that play out before. So the real question is, will India be different?
Well, it's already the fifth largest economy in the world, right?
That's right.
They just recently surpassed both France and the UK.
Yeah. In terms of GDP, that's true. But size isn't everything. It's the speed of India's growth that's really got everyone talking. Projections show it staying in the fast lane for the foreseeable future, possibly even overtaking Japan and Germany.
Wow.
At that point, only the US and China would be bigger.
Okay, so that definitely has my attention.
Right.
But China's been a growth engine for decades.
Yeah.
And its stock market hasn't exactly been a runaway success, especially for investors.
Yeah.
What's different about India?
That's the key question, isn't it? One big difference is how their markets are structured.
Okay.
Specifically, the role of what are called state-owned enterprises, or SOEs for short.
Okay.
In China, SOEs are huge. I mean, we're talking 57% of the top 100 companies' market cap.
Wow.
And their main goal isn't always profit.
Mm.
They often focus on, fulfilling government objectives,
Right.
which, that can sometimes stifle competition and efficiency.
Interesting. So less of a free market there in China?
Yeah, you could say.
More government influence? What about in India?
India's landscape is a lot more private sector driven.
Okay.
SOEs only make up about 14% of the market cap there.
Okay.
And actually, if you look at these charts from our research, the contrast is pretty striking.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. That is a huge difference. So more competition in India?
Yeah.
Maybe that leads to more innovation?
Could be.
That makes sense. But I've also heard that India can be a wild ride for investors.
Oh, yeah.
How does the risk-reward balance look there?
That's where things get interesting.
Okay.
India's market can be volatile, no doubt.
Right.
But here's the thing. Despite that volatility, it's consistently had a very high return to volatility ratio, even rivaling the U.S. market.
Really? Higher than I would have thought.
Yeah.
But how does that compare to other, emerging markets with, say, similar levels of volatility?
It's significantly better. Take Brazil or South Africa, for example. They just haven't delivered the same level of return for the amount of risk investors have to take on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we've got size, we've got speed, a market structure that favors private enterprise.
Right.
And now it seems like a pretty compelling risk-reward profile. Anything else we should be thinking about?
Well, one thing smart investors always keep in mind is diversification.
Right, not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
I've heard that one.
And India actually has a unique advantage there.
Oh, really? How so?
It has a surprisingly low correlation to other major markets, even other emerging markets.
Interesting.
Yeah, this correlation matrix we have in our research really highlights that.
Okay, starting to see why everyone's so bullish on India.
Yeah.
But I've also been hearing a lot about, how much money domestic investors are pouring into the Indian market.
Yeah.
That's got to be a good sign, right?
It's definitely something to pay attention to. The amount of money coming from domestic institutional investors, or DIIs, has been steadily climbing.
Okay.
And yeah, that does suggest growing confidence from within India itself.
What's driving that domestic investment surge? Is it big institutions, wealthy individuals, or?
It's actually something a lot more widespread.
Okay.
It's these things called SIPs, or systematic investment plans, that are becoming super popular.
I haven't heard of those.
They let everyday people, make regular smaller investments in mutual funds.
Oh.
So it's kind of like democratizing investing in a way.
Interesting. So you've got this steady flow of domestic investment alongside the more, I guess you could say, volatile foreign capital.
Right.
Could that make India's market a bit more stable, less susceptible to those global shocks?
It's a possibility, yeah. Definitely worth watching. But even with all this positive news, there's one thing we haven't talked about yet.
Okay.
Kind of the elephant in the room, maybe?
You talking about valuations?
Yeah. Every time I look at the Indian market, it seems like it's always trading at a premium.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is it just too expensive to get in on the action?
Well, it's true that India often trades at a premium compared to other markets,
Right.
but historically, that premium has been justified by strong ROE or return on equity.
So you get what you pay for, basically.
You could say that. And if you compare India's ROE to other emerging markets, it's consistently at the top.
Okay, so we've looked at market structure, risk reward, diversification, valuations.
Right.
Seems like the numbers are looking pretty good. But what about those, less tangible factors
Yeah, you're right.
that are driving this wave of optimism around India?
It's not just about numbers. Things like India's young and increasingly well-educated workforce,
Okay.
the improvements they're making to their infrastructure,
Yeah.
and the revival of their manufacturing sector are all contributing to the excitement.
A lot of potential there.
A lot of potential, that's for sure. But, potential doesn't always equal reality.
Right, of course.
Are there any risks we haven't talked about yet? Any potential clouds on the horizon?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
We should definitely get into that.
Welcome back to our deep dive into India's economic rise.
Glad to be back.
Hmm.
We were just starting to touch on some of the potential risks with investing in India.
Right, right. It's important to remember no investment is without risk.
Of course.
And India, is no exception.
So what are some of the things that could maybe derail India's growth?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, India's political landscape can be a bit complex.
Right.
With a multi-party system, coalition governments are pretty common.
Yeah.
So policy uncertainty is definitely something investors have to consider.
That makes sense. I mean, if the government's priorities suddenly shift or there's some unexpected policy change,
Yeah.
that could really throw things off,
Yeah.
especially for businesses operating in India.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's the bureaucracy.
Right.
While India's made efforts to streamline regulations, doing business there can still be pretty complicated, especially for foreign companies.
Yeah.
All those layers of red tape.
Yeah, I've heard stories
It can be a real challenge.
about how it can be tough to get things done, even for domestic companies.
Yeah.
It sounds like that could really hinder growth
It could.
and even discourage investment.
Yeah, it's definitely a potential obstacle. And speaking of obstacles,
Yeah.
we can't ignore the infrastructure issue.
Right.
While India has been investing heavily in improving its infrastructure,
Yeah.
there are still some significant gaps, especially in rural areas.
Right. Like if you don't have adequate infrastructure,
Yeah.
that can be a major bottleneck for businesses, making it tough to transport goods, access reliable energy, and just operate efficiently.
Exactly.
And that would, it seems like, limit the potential for growth in certain sectors.
Absolutely. And then there are, the social challenges India faces.
Right.
We talked about poverty and inequality earlier.
Yeah.
Those issues are intertwined with economic development.
Right.
Addressing them is crucial not just for the well-being of India's citizens,
Oh, of course.
but also for sustainable long-term growth.
It's a good reminder that economic progress isn't just about GDP.
Yeah.
It's about creating a more inclusive society where everyone benefits. But let's move on from the risks.
Okay.
What are some of the sectors that have people excited about investing in India?
One sector that's attracting a lot of attention is technology.
Tech. Yeah.
India already has a thriving IT services industry,
Right.
and it's quickly becoming a hub for startups and innovation.
Yeah, Bangalore is often called the Silicon Valley of India, right?
That's right. Bangalore has a vibrant tech scene,
Yeah.
but it's not the only one.
Oh, okay.
Cities like Hyderabad, Pune, and Gurgaon are also becoming major tech hubs.
So it's spreading,
It is.
attracting domestic and international companies.
Yeah, yeah. So we're not just talking about outsourcing IT services anymore.
No.
Indian tech companies are developing their own cutting-edge products and solutions
Wow.
in fields like AI, cloud computing, e-commerce.
Hmm.
They're not just following global trends, they're creating their own.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
What other sectors are looking promising?
Another one to watch is manufacturing.
Manufacturing.
India has traditionally been known for its services sector,
Right.
but the government has been really pushing to boost manufacturing
Hmm.
through initiatives like Make in India.
I've heard of that. Isn't that attracting foreign investment
Yeah,
and creating jobs in manufacturing?
exactly. And it seems to be working.
Okay.
Manufacturing activity has been picking up,
Yeah.
and there's growing interest from global companies looking to diversify their supply chains.
Makes sense, especially with all the tensions with China these days.
Yeah, exactly. If India can really become a major manufacturing hub,
Yeah.
it could shake things up globally.
They could. And then, of course, you've got the consumer sector in India.
Oh, right.
with a rapidly expanding middle class and more disposable income.
Yeah.
Huge market potential there.
Massive market for everything from consumer goods and automobiles to healthcare services and entertainment.
So a whole new generation of consumers
Yes,
entering the market ready to spend.
precisely.
That's got to be fueling growth across a lot of sectors,
It is,
making it attractive for both domestic and foreign businesses.
for sure. But going back to the stock market for a second,
Yeah,
we talked earlier about how India has historically traded at a premium.
right.
Is that still the case?
Yeah, is it still expensive?
It is, but it's important to remember valuations can fluctuate.
Right.
And as of December 2024,
Yeah.
India's price to book ratio is actually above its historical average.
So what does that mean for investors?
Well, it suggests there could be some downside risk in the short term.
So is now a good time to invest, or should people wait for a dip?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Timing the market is always tricky.
Yeah.
What's really important is to focus on the long term
Okay.
and make sure your investment decisions align with your own goals and risk tolerance.
Right. No crystal ball.
No crystal ball.
But it sounds like India has a lot going for it.
It does.
Impressive economic growth, a good market structure, relatively low correlation to other markets,
Huh.
and a lot of potential in sectors like tech, manufacturing, consumer goods.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that growing domestic investment.
Right, from Indian households.
Yeah.
That's a positive indicator.
It is.
Okay, I'm feeling a lot more informed about India now.
Good.
But before we move on, you mentioned earlier that India's political landscape can be complex.
Right.
Could you maybe elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, sure. So, as we discussed, India has a multi-party political system,
Right.
which often leads to coalition governments.
Yeah.
And these coalitions can be, well, less stable,
Right.
more prone to policy shifts than a single party government.
I see. Are there any specific political events or issues coming up that investors should be aware of?
It's also worth noting that India has a long history of democracy
Oh.
and a relatively stable political system.
All right.
Changes in government don't usually cause huge shifts in economic policy.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
So overall, it seems like India's economic and political situation is pretty stable,
Yeah,
with potential for more growth.
for sure.
But of course, there are risks to consider, like the policy uncertainty, the
Yeah.
bureaucracy, the infrastructure limitations.
Absolutely. It's about weighing the potential rewards against the risks.
Okay. I think we've covered a lot of ground today,
Yeah.
from economic growth and market structure to the risks and opportunities and the potential in key sectors.
Yeah, it's been a good overview.
What are your final thoughts on India as an investment opportunity?
Well, India is definitely an exciting market
Yeah,
with huge potential.
Yeah.
Strong economic growth,
right.
favorable demographics,
Yeah.
and a government that's increasingly pro-business.
Yeah.
All that makes it attractive for investors.
But like you said, it's not without its challenges.
That's right. Investors need to be aware of the potential downsides, like we discussed,
Yeah.
the policy uncertainty, the bureaucratic hurdles, and the infrastructure gaps that still exist.
So it's not just a buy and forget type of investment?
Definitely not. Investing in India requires research, due diligence,
Okay.
and a long-term perspective.
Okay. Good advice.
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm feeling pretty optimistic about India's future after all this.
It's hard not to be.
They really do seem to have the potential to be a major player on the global economic stage.
I agree. India's rise is a story worth watching closely.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up part 2 of our deep dive into India's economic rise.
Okay.
Don't worry, we'll be back in part 3 to tackle one final crucial aspect of this whole story, the role of sustainability in India's growth trajectory.
Yeah, join us for part 3 where we'll explore how India is balancing economic development with environmental and social responsibility.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about India's economic rise, and for this final part, we're going to explore something that's really crucial to the whole picture,
Right.
sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one thing to have a booming economy,
Right.
but doing it in a way that's environmentally and socially responsible,
Right.
that's the real challenge.
Yeah, it can't just be growth at all costs.
Right.
So what does India's track record look like in this area?
Well, like a lot of rapidly developing nations, India's got some serious environmental hurdles.
Right.
Air and water pollution, deforestation, the impacts of climate change.
Right.
All these issues are tied to economic growth. So finding solutions, well, it's complicated.
It sounds pretty daunting. Are there any concrete steps being taken to kind of address these issues?
Well, India is actually making some bold moves, particularly in the renewable energy space.
Okay.
They've set a target to generate 50% of their electricity from renewable sources by 2030.
50%. Wow, that's ambitious. What's driving that?
It's a few things.
Okay.
There's growing awareness of the climate crisis,
Yeah.
obviously, but they also want to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels.
Okay.
And on top of that, they see the economic potential of renewables, creating jobs, attracting investment, becoming a leader in the field.
So it's not just about being eco-conscious, it's also a smart economic strategy.
Exactly.
What about other areas of sustainability?
Yeah.
What else is India focusing on?
They've got several programs aimed at improving air quality, promoting sustainable agriculture, conserving water.
Land.
It's a multi-pronged approach,
Yeah.
trying to tackle all these interconnected issues.
Right. We also talked earlier about social sustainability, things like poverty and inequality.
Right.
How is India making sure that everyone benefits from this economic growth, not just a select few?
That's a crucial point. India's got a number of social welfare programs designed to provide healthcare, education, access to financial services, especially for marginalized communities.
Okay.
The goal is to lift people out of poverty and create a more equitable society.
So creating opportunities for everyone to benefit.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's not just the government's responsibility, is it? What about the private sector?
That's a good point.
What role are they playing?
There's a growing awareness among Indian businesses about corporate social responsibility.
Okay.
More and more companies are taking steps to reduce their environmental impact.
Yeah.
Improve working conditions, support local communities.
So a shift in mindset.
Yeah, a recognition that sustainable practices aren't just good for the planet and society,
Right.
but good for business in the long run.
It's a win-win. But let's be realistic. India has a long way to go.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest roadblocks?
One of the toughest is finding that balance between economic development and environmental protection.
Yeah.
They often seem at odds with each other, and making choices that benefit both in the long run, well, that's tricky.
Right, because sometimes it feels like economic growth comes at the expense of the environment.
Yeah, at least in the short term.
In the short term, yeah.
Sure. And another hurdle is just the sheer scale of India's population and the pace of growth.
Right.
Meeting the needs of so many people while also prioritizing sustainability, that's a huge task.
They're juggling a lot.
Mm.
Are there any reasons to be optimistic, though?
Oh, absolutely.
Despite all these challenges?
Yeah, awareness of these issues is growing, both among the public and in the government.
Okay.
And like we've talked about, concrete action is being taken,
Right.
investing in renewables, implementing social programs, promoting sustainable businesses.
Okay.
It's a work in progress, but the commitment is there.
So it's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly.
Okay.
Sustainability isn't something you achieve overnight. It's an ongoing process.
Well, after this deep dive into India's economic rise, I'm feeling, a mix of excitement and cautious optimism.
Yeah,
It seems like they have incredible potential,
they do.
but achieving it in a way that's sustainable and benefits everyone, that's the key.
I agree. It's a story that's still being written, and their commitment to sustainability will play a big part in shaping the future.
It's definitely a story worth following. And that concludes our deep dive into India's economic rise. We've covered a lot.
We have.
Economic growth, market dynamics, risks, opportunities, and of course, the critical role of sustainability.
Right.
I hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we have.
Yeah, it's been a good one.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.